It's strange how quickly a lifetime can crack. One day you're drinking coffee with a woman you've loved for decades, planning retirement trips and laughing about old memories. And the next, you're staring at a truth that makes you question every smile, every touch, every word. That was me the day I learned my wife had been unfaithful. Before I go any further, let me pause for a second. If you've ever given someone your trust only to have it broken, this story will feel familiar. And if you're new here, welcome. I share true-to-life stories of betrayal, justice, and revenge. To my returning listeners, thank you. You're the reason I keep going. Please subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment if you've ever had to forgive someone who hurt you. And if you know someone struggling with trust, share this story. It might help them see they're not alone. Now back to that day. I still remember how she looked when she admitted it. Her hands shook, her eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she whispered, "It was a mistake." She didn't call it love, didn't even call it an affair, just a mistake. A single night, she claimed. Something meaningless, something she regretted the second it happened. I wanted to believe her. No, I needed to believe her. Because if I didn't, then 30 years of marriage suddenly meant nothing. And how does a man survive that? So I listened. I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers gripping the edge so hard my knuckles turned white, and I listened as she cried and promised it would never happen again. "It was just once," she sobbed. "I swear to you, Tom. I swear on everything." The anger in me wanted to throw her out that very night. Wanted to call our kids, our friends, and expose her. Wanted to tear the walls down with my fists. But another part of me, the tired part, the part that remembered raising children with her, burying parents together, holding each other through sickness, that part begged for another answer. And so, against my better judgment, I forgave her. Not blindly, not easily. We went to counseling. Week after week, sitting on a couch in a stranger's office, talking about trust, communication, and rebuilding the foundation. I poured my soul into those sessions. I admitted where I had failed her, listened to where she claimed I hadn't been present enough, hadn't been affectionate enough. It cut deep, but I was willing to bleed if it meant saving us. Slowly, painfully, things seemed to mend. She grew more attentive, more affectionate. She left sticky notes on my lunch bag. She called me at work just to say she missed me. It was like we were dating again, like the cracks had been sealed with fresh cement. I let myself believe. I told myself people make mistakes. That maybe, just maybe, she had slipped once and learned her lesson. Years passed. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. I buried the memory of her affair like a stone at the bottom of a river. It was still there, but the water of time and routine ran over it until I could almost forget. Almost. Because the truth is, forgiveness doesn't erase. It only covers. And sometimes, if you're not careful, the cover slips. But at the time, I didn't know that. At the time, I thought we had made it. We had survived the storm, rebuilt the walls, and set our eyes on the future again. And for years, I carried that belief with pride. I didn't know then that forgiveness wasn't the end of the betrayal. It was just the intermission. If you've ever broken a bone, you know the feeling. The cast comes off, the skin looks whole again, but deep inside there's still a weakness. Something fragile that never quite feels the same. That's what our marriage became after her affair. On the outside, we looked stronger than ever. Friends commented on how affectionate we seemed, how lucky we were to have survived such a rough patch. Our kids were relieved when we told them things were better. Even I started to believe it myself. We did everything the therapist suggested. Date nights once a week. Honest check-ins about our feelings. We wrote letters to each other about what we wanted for the future. She cried through hers, saying she wanted nothing more than to grow old with me, to make up for her mistake. I read that letter a dozen times, letting the words sink into the cracks in my chest like mortar. For years, it worked. She became attentive in a way she hadn't been in years. She'd kiss me goodbye in the mornings before work, ask about my day when I got home, sit with me on the porch at sunset like we used to when we were younger. She even suggested little weekend trips, just the two of us. We went to bed holding hands again. And I, fool that I was, believed the cement was holding. I threw myself back into work with renewed energy. The plant had been downsizing, and I was determined to hang on until retirement. Extra shifts, overtime, whatever they needed. I told myself I was doing it for us, for the life we were rebuilding. Every hour I sweated under fluorescent lights was an hour I imagined turning into trips, into dinners, into lazy mornings in bed together when we were finally free of alarm clocks. We celebrated anniversaries with quiet dinners. She gave me cards filled with words about new beginnings and second chances. I bought her jewelry, nothing too fancy, but tokens of a man trying to prove his devotion. To anyone looking in, we were a success story. The couple who'd weathered the storm and come out stronger. Even I wore that badge with pride, telling friends at work that counseling had saved us, that forgiveness had been worth it. But in quiet moments, doubts still lingered. Sometimes, when she smiled at me, I'd catch a flicker in her eyes that didn't match the warmth in her lips. Sometimes, when she reached for her phone a little too quickly, I'd feel a sting in my chest, a reminder of what that phone had once hidden. I pushed those thoughts down, convinced myself I was being paranoid. You chose forgiveness, I'd remind myself. Don't poison it with suspicion. And for the most part, I succeeded. I buried the doubts under years of routine, under work, under family gatherings and Christmas mornings and birthday cakes. By the time retirement loomed, I was almost proud of myself. Proud that I hadn't let one betrayal destroy a lifetime. Proud that I'd chosen the high road, that I'd proved the people who said, once a cheater, always a cheater wrong. I pictured the two of us traveling after I left the plant, maybe visiting the Grand Canyon, maybe going back to the beach where we'd honeymooned. She seemed excited when I talked about it, nodding along, smiling. She even started leaving travel magazines on the coffee table, flipping through them with me. I thought, foolishly, that we had beaten the odds, that our story would be one of hope, not tragedy. But here's the thing about illusions. They shine brightest right before they shatter. And mine was about to break in ways I couldn't imagine. Because the truth, the real truth, was that my wife hadn't changed at all. She hadn't stopped. Not after counseling. Not after letters and promises and holding hands at night. She had just gotten better at hiding it. And when retirement finally brought me home full-time, I was about to see just how deep the cracks really went. The last day I punched out the plant, I felt like I was walking on air. 38 years of sweat and steel behind me. And finally, the promise of rest. I shook hands with the guys, collected the cheap gold watch they handed me, and drove home with the kind of grin I hadn't worn since my 20s. All the way there, I thought about what was waiting for me. Mornings on the porch with coffee. Afternoons fishing or tinkering in the garage. Evenings with her by my side. No alarm clocks, no shift bells, just time. The one thing we never had enough of. She was waiting at the door when I pulled in, arms open, smile wide. "Congratulations, Tom," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "Now we get to start the rest of our lives." And for the first few weeks, it was just like I imagined. We lingered in bed in the mornings, no rush to get up. We took long walks around the neighborhood, stopping to chat with neighbors. She made big breakfasts, and I teased her about how I'd finally eat better now that I wasn't scarfing down vending machine sandwiches at work. I started fixing things around the house I'd put off for years. A loose railing on the porch, a leaky faucet in the kitchen. She'd peek in and smile, saying, "You always were the handyman." It felt good, normal, like we were finally settling into the life we'd earned. But then small things began to gnaw at me. It started with her phone. She carried it everywhere, into the bathroom, into the laundry room, even into the garden. I used to chalk that up to habit, but now that I was home all the time, I noticed how often she kept the screen tilted away, how quickly she silenced calls. Then there were her errands. "I'm running to the store," she'd say, grabbing her purse. Sometimes she'd be gone 2 hours, come back with only a loaf of bread or a carton of milk. When I asked why it took so long, she'd smile and say she ran into someone she knew. Once or twice, She claimed she had church committee meetings. But when I asked our pastor about them, he gave me a puzzled look. There hasn't been a committee meeting in months. I brushed it off at first. Told myself she just needed space, just wanted independence now that I was always around. After all, I've been gone for 12-hour shifts most of my life. Maybe she just wasn't used to me being home yet. But deep down, a knot began to form in my stomach. A knot I'd felt before. It was the same knot I'd carried years ago when she first confessed. The one that whispered, she's hiding something. The cracks grew wider. One afternoon, I came back early from fishing with a buddy. Her car was in the driveway, but when I walked inside, the house was empty. No note, no sign of her. I waited an hour, then two, pacing the living room. Finally, she walked in, smiling too brightly, holding a bag of groceries that didn't match the time she was gone. "Where were you?" I asked. "Just shopping," she said quickly, avoiding my eyes. It was a small lie, too small to argue over. But small lies are how big truths hide. That night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling while she breathed evenly, like nothing was wrong. My chest ached with questions I didn't want answers to. Had she really changed? Had all those years of therapy, all those promises been nothing but a show? The next morning, over coffee, she asked me about retirement plans. "Where do you want to travel first? The canyon? The coast?" Her voice was warm, her smile easy, and for a second, I almost let myself believe it again. But then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her smile faltered, and she flipped it face down on the table. The knot in my stomach pulled tighter. I wanted to believe her. God knows I did. But retirement had stripped away the distance, the distractions, the excuses. Now I saw everything. Every glance at her phone. Every unexplained errand. Every flicker in her eyes when she said she loved me. And no matter how hard I tried, the truth whispered louder each day. She hadn't changed. Not then. Not now. Not ever. I just hadn't caught her yet. They say when you've been burned once, you know the smell of smoke before the fire even starts. That's how it felt in those first months after retirement. Little signs, little shifts, the same ones I'd seen years ago. Only this time, I couldn't ignore them. It began with her phone. Always in her hand, always face down on the counter. She'd smile at me while we drank coffee, but I could see her thumb twitching, her eyes flicking down at the slightest buzz. Once, she laughed at something, then quickly cleared the screen before I could glimpse it. When I asked, she said it was a meme from Linda at church. But Linda's husband later mentioned she wasn't much of a phone person. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling while my wife scrolled beside me. I remembered the counselor telling us years ago that transparency was key. No more secrets. Passwords shared, phones left in the open. For a while, she had done that, but not anymore. Then there were the errands. She always seemed to be running late from the store or bumping into friends. One Tuesday, she said she had a church luncheon. I waved her off, wishing her a good time. But later that afternoon, when I stopped by the church to drop off a donation, the hall was dark and locked. When I asked her that evening how the luncheon went, she smiled and said, "Lovely." We talked about the bake sale. I didn't argue. I just nodded and let the lie hang between us like smoke curling toward the ceiling. But the real shift came with her demeanor. When I was still working, she used to fuss over me in the evenings, asking if I was tired, if I'd eaten. Now that I was home, her warmth felt forced. She laughed too loudly at my jokes, touched my hand too often, as if rehearsing what love was supposed to look like. And sometimes, when she thought I wasn't watching, I'd catch her staring into the distance with a look I couldn't read. Not guilt exactly, not sadness. Something worse. Disconnection. I tried to push it aside. After all, hadn't we rebuilt? Hadn't we fought through the fire once before? Maybe I was just paranoid, seeing ghosts in every shadow. But then came the night that stripped away doubt. I'd fallen asleep in my chair after watching the late news. Sometime past midnight, I woke to the sound of her voice in the kitchen. Soft, low, urgent. I crept halfway down the hall, careful not to let the floorboards creak. She stood by the back door, phone pressed her ear, whispering, I miss you too. He's asleep. I can't talk long. The words hit like a hammer. My stomach turned, my throat closed. She ended the call quickly, slipping back to bed like nothing happened. I sat in the dark living room, my heart pounding, every nerve screaming the truth I had been denying. She hadn't changed. The affair hadn't ended. Not after counseling. Not after tears. Not after promises. It had never ended at all. The next morning, she made me pancakes. Smiled as she poured syrup, kissed me on the cheek. Her performance was flawless. If I hadn't heard her the night before, I might have believed it. But now every word, every smile, every touch fell hollow. I didn't confront her. Not yet. The younger me, the one who'd caught her years ago, would have exploded right then. But I'd learned something from that first betrayal. If you want the truth to stick, you don't pounce on shadows. You wait for the sun. So I watched. I noticed the way she dressed differently on errand days. More makeup, nicer shoes, perfume I hadn't smelled in years. I noticed how she always checked her reflection before heading out, even if it was just for a quick trip to the store. I kept notes. Time she left. Time she came back. Excuses given. The counselor had once told me to look for progress, not perfection. But what I saw wasn't imperfection. It was a pattern. The exact same one I'd lived through years ago. And this time, I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers with a few tears and apologies. Because forgiveness had bought me nothing but lies. I didn't know exactly who it was yet. Didn't know how deep it went. But I knew this. My wife had fooled me once, and she thought she was fooling me again. She had no idea that the man she thought was retired and relaxed was watching more closely than ever. And soon, she was going to learn that betrayal doesn't get a third chance. There's a moment when suspicion finally turns to certainty that feels like the ground opening under your feet. You tell yourself you're prepared. You tell yourself you've seen enough signs. But when the truth lands, it still knocks the breath clean out of you. That moment came for me on a Wednesday. She had told me she was going shopping, that she needed to pick up a few things. I kissed her goodbye at the door, pretending not to notice the perfume she almost never wore for me anymore, or the way she smoothed her blouse in the mirror before leaving. But instead of heading inside to tinker in the garage like usual, I grabbed my keys and followed. I kept my distance, careful not to get too close. She drove past the supermarket, past the shops, past everything that matched her excuse. My hands gripped the wheel tighter with every turn. Finally, she pulled into the parking lot of a motel off the highway. Cheap, discreet, the kind of place people don't go for long stays. My stomach dropped. I watched as she parked, checked her phone, then stepped out. A man was waiting near the entrance. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't some shadow from a bar or a coworker I'd never met. He was Mike. The same man from years ago. The same man she had sworn was a mistake. I froze, staring at the two of them. She walked straight into his arms. Not a hesitant hug. Not guilt-ridden distance. Full, practiced like it was the most natural thing in the world. That was when the last shred of doubt left me. This wasn't a slip. This wasn't a mistake. It was a life she'd been living right under my nose. Counseling, apologies, sticky notes on my lunch bag. All of it nothing more than cover for a betrayal that never ended. I sat there in my truck, hands shaking, heart thundering in my chest. Part of me wanted to storm across the lot, drag her out by the arm, scream in his face. But I didn't. Not this time. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped pictures. Her walking into his arms. Their kiss. The two of them heading into the room together. Cold evidence. The kind no tears or excuses could erase. I drove home in silence. The house felt different when I stepped inside. Empty. Dead. Like the walls themselves knew the truth now. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place she had once confessed years ago, and laid my phone down in front of me. The pictures stared back, stark and undeniable. When she came home 3 hours later, she carried 2 grocery bags. She set them on the counter, smiling like nothing had happened. They had a sale on produce, she said. I thought I'd make stir-fry tonight. I didn't speak, just watch her bustle around the kitchen, humming softly. Finally, I said, "Did you have fun at the motel?" Her body froze. The bag in her hand slipped, apples rolling across the floor. Slowly, she turned, her face pale. What?" she stammered. I slid my phone across the table. The pictures glowed on the screen. Her in his arms. The kiss. The motel door closing behind them. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the chair across from me. Tears welled in her eyes instantly, spilling down her cheeks. "Tom, please. Don't," I said sharply. My voice was low, steady, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Don't insult me with another lie. Not again," she sobbed, reaching for my hand, but I pulled it away. "I forgave you once," I continued. "I went to counseling. I believed your letters, your promises. I worked myself into the ground to give us a future. And all this time, you were still sneaking around with him. It's not what you think," she started, but her voice cracked under the weight of the evidence. "It's exactly what I think," I cut in. "You never stopped. Not once." The kitchen filled with her crying, her words tumbling out in fragments. "I'm sorry. I thought it was over. I didn't mean to. A house of cards." And now, I had the wind to blow it down. When she finally stopped crying, she whispered, "Can you forgive me?" I stood, sliding my phone back into my pocket. "No," I said simply. "Not this time." And I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sobbing at the table. The morning after I confronted her, the house felt like a tomb. She moved quietly through the kitchen, setting down a plate of eggs in front of me like it was any other day. Her eyes were swollen, her hands trembling, but she didn't speak. I ate in silence, the scrape of my fork against the plate echoing through the stillness. She was waiting for me to explode, to yell, to rage. But the storm had already passed. What was left wasn't fire. It was ice, and ice can cut deeper than flame. She tried a dozen times that week to talk, to explain. I let her speak, but I never responded beyond a nod or a shake of the head. I wasn't interested in apologies. I wasn't interested in promises. I was interested in something else entirely, making sure that after decades of my sweat, my loyalty, and my forgiveness, she wouldn't walk away with the things I had built. So while she begged and cried, I made calls. The first was to Alan. My lawyer had been with me through the plant layoffs, through pension negotiations, through the mess when my parents passed. He was steady, reliable, and most importantly, discreet. When I told him what had happened, he sighed. "I was hoping I'd never get this call from you, Tom. But you did the right thing saving the proof. That's going to make this a lot easier." "I don't just want out," I said. My voice was calm, steady. "I want protection. She doesn't get to gut me on her way out the door." Alan nodded. "Then we start with the accounts. We'll freeze joint access until the court sorts it. We'll move your pension payments into a separate account under your name. The house, did you ever retitle after counseling?" I nodded. "Yes. It's under my name only." "Good. That'll help." Step by step, we laid it out. Protect the accounts. Secure the pension. Gather the evidence into a neat, undeniable package for the court. By the time Alan was done, my wife could wail and scream all she wanted, but legally, her hands would be tied. The second call was to Curtis, the private investigator who had helped me confirm the affair. He chuckled dryly when he picked up. "Back again so soon." "I need the full package," I said. "Dates, times, everything you've got. I don't want this to come down to her word against mine. You'll have it by Friday." That night, she curled up beside me in bed, whispering, "I'll do better, Tom. I promise. We can fix this." Her voice shook, her hand trembling on my chest. I stared at the ceiling, saying nothing. Inside, my resolve only hardened. Fix this? There was no fixing what was never healed in the first place. Over the next week, I played the part of a husband slowly softening. I sat at the table with her. I let her cook my meals. I even let her rest her head on my shoulder while we watched television. She thought she was making progress. She thought time was dulling my edge. She didn't know every smile I gave her was a mask. She didn't know that while she clung to me, Alan was filing paperwork and Curtis was building a case that would shatter her illusions. One evening, She brought up the idea of taking that trip we talked about before retirement. Maybe the coast, she said with a hopeful smile. Just the two of us. We could start fresh. I almost laughed. Fresh. She wanted to start fresh after burying me in the same lies for years. But instead, I reached for her hand, squeezed it lightly, and said, maybe. Let's see. Her eyes filled with relief. She thought she won me back. And that was when I knew my revenge would land harder than any screaming match ever could. Because it wouldn't just be about catching her. It would be about showing her that while she thought she was repairing the marriage, I was dismantling it piece by piece behind her back. By the time she realized, it would be too late. Friday came, and Curtis delivered. A thick envelope filled with photographs, time-stamped logs, and receipts. Evidence of her betrayal stretching back years, overlapping with the very counseling sessions where she'd sworn she was changing. I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the pages. There she was, meeting Mike at motels, having dinner with him at the diner, whispering in her car on late nights. Every lie she'd told me, every smile she'd faked, laid bare in black and white. I felt no anger as I looked at it, no heartbreak, just clarity. The illusion was gone, and now it was time to end the play. The envelope from Curtis sat heavy in my briefcase all weekend. I didn't rush. I didn't storm into the kitchen and slam it on the table. I waited. Patience, I'd learned, was my greatest weapon. On Monday morning, I poured myself a coffee, set the briefcase on the counter, and called her in. She padded in from the bedroom, hair still damp from her shower, and smiled at me like nothing was wrong. Like decades of lies hadn't just unraveled in my hands. "What's all this?" she asked, nodding at the case. I clicked it open and slid the stack of papers toward her. Photos, logs, receipts, the truth bound neatly in a folder. Her eyes widened as she flipped through them. Her hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling instantly. "Tom, please." I held up a hand. Calm, steady, cold. "No, don't waste your breath. I've heard every excuse, every promise, every lie. This is the last time we're ever going to talk about it." She sobbed, reaching for my hand across the counter, but I pulled it back. "I forgave you once," I said quietly. "I believed you when you said it was a mistake. I believed the counseling, the letters, the tears. And all this time, you were laughing at me, carrying on like nothing had changed. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." I closed the folder, slid it back in the briefcase. "Alan's filing the papers today. The accounts are secured. The house is mine. You'll get nothing beyond what the court requires. And when people ask why, I'll have the proof ready." Her face crumpled. She sank into the chair, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. "Tom, don't do this. Please, I'll stop. I'll change. I stood, looking down at her. "You had years to stop, years to change, and you chose him. Over and over again, you chose him." The silence that followed was sharp, cutting through her cries. For the first time in a long time, I felt calm, whole, like the weight of years had been lifted from my shoulders. That afternoon, Alan and I signed the papers. Clean, final, unforgiving. When the court date came, she tried to plead her case. Her lawyer talked about years of marriage, about partnership, about contributions to the household. But when Alan slid the evidence across the judge's bench, the case was over before it began. She left with a fraction of what she expected. No house, no pension, no claim to the life I had built. Just an apartment on the other side of town and the memory of what she had thrown away. The last time I saw her, she was standing in the driveway with a single suitcase. She looked smaller somehow. "Hello." She whispered something I couldn't hear. Maybe an apology, maybe a curse, before climbing into a friend's car. I didn't wave, didn't call after her. Just turned back into the house, closing the door behind me. Inside, I poured a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The morning light spilled across the wood, the same table where she had once cried for forgiveness, where she had begged me to believe in her. The table where she had lost everything. I raised the cup, not in triumph, not in bitterness, but in peace. Because for the first time in decades, the silence in my house was honest. No secrets, no lies, no betrayals hiding in the dark. Just me. And that was enough. And if you stayed with me through this whole story, thank you. You're the reason I share these tales. Because betrayal isn't rare, but neither is justice if you're willing to stand firm. Please subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that forgiveness without change isn't healing. It's surrender. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you found out the person you forgave never stopped betraying you? As for me, I already gave her my answer. A cold, final goodbye.